You think you're making the right move because it feels smart, it looks logical, it seems mature. But deep down, something's off. And you're calling it doubt or nerves or just part of the process. But I'll tell you what it really is. God is warning you, you're about to settle. See, people rarely make huge life-altering mistakes in a moment of chaos. No, most of the time, the biggest mistakes come quietly in those moments when you convince yourself to accept less than what you know you were born here. That's the dangerous part. It's not the temptation to destroy everything. It's the slow, polite whisper of mediocrity. Just take the offer. Just marry the person. Just stay at the job. Just play it safe. It's good enough. But good enough isn't God enough. You were built for purpose, for mission, for movement. And yet here you are, shrinking your soul to fit inside a space God never called you to. Why? Because it's available. Because it looks better than what you had. Because you're tired of waiting. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Settling feels like wisdom when you're scared. That's what makes it dangerous. You start dressing fear up in the clothes of maturity. You tell people, I've just become more realistic. But what you've really become is afraid to expect again. Afraid to hope again. Because hoping opens the door to disappointment, and you've had enough of that, haven't you? But listen to me, God isn't calling you to realism. He's calling you to vision. There's a difference. Realism will teach you how to survive. Vision teaches you how to live. You weren't created to manage life. You were created to move it, shift it, impact it. You want the psychological truth. Your brain is wired to avoid pain at all costs, even if that means settling for less than what your spirit longs for. That's why your mind will justify mediocrity. It'll say, at least I won't get hurt again. That's trauma speaking, not truth. God doesn't guide through fear, He guides through conviction. And the reason you feel uneasy, the reason there's that small gnawing voice saying this isn't it, is because it's not. But you don't want to hear that because it threatens your timeline. It threatens your illusion of control. We all want God to move, but only when it's convenient. Only when it fits the schedule we designed in our head. But He doesn't play by our deadlines, and on He doesn't act, because some of you had married the wrong person, signed the wrong deal, or locked yourself into a rock dare. Sign of quiet desperation, just because you were in a rush. Understand something. Every decision you make is a vote toward the person you are becoming. And today you're about to vote for a version of you that God never authored. A smaller you. A safer you. A you that pleases people but disappoints heaven. A you that looks good on the outside but is slowly dying on the inside. This is where you need to stop and ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's truly right? Or because I'm just tired of waiting for what's mine? Because settling isn't always about lack of options. Sometimes it's just about lack of patience. And don't get it twisted, patience isn't weakness. Patience is power restrained. It's knowing you could move, but choosing to stay still because you know your movement isn't random, it's strategic. God doesn't rush, He doesn't panic. And if you're aligned with Him, neither will you. So before you make that decision, pause. Don't just think, discern. Ask yourself if this is what you were truly made for, or if it's just what's available right now. Because there's a difference between what's available and what's anointed. A very big difference. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll spend your life calling convenience a blessing when really it's a distraction. Don't make the mistake of calling good enough your destiny. Because the moment you choose to settle, you start living beneath the echo of the life you were born to lead. You ever notice how fear always detail? It talks in a calm voice, it brings logical arguments. It says, I'm just trying to protect you. And that's how it tricks you, because fear doesn't feel like fear when it's wearing the costume of caution. But let's be real. Most of you are making decisions based on wisdom. You're making them based on fear and calling it being realistic. You're calling it being mature. You're calling it not wanting to repeat past mistakes. But what it really is surrender, not the noble kind, the kind where you abandon your own future and convince yourself it was the smart move. Let me say it plainly, God isn't in your fear, He's in your faith. Now, I'm not talking about blind, reckless Instagram quote faith. I'm talking about the kind of faith that shakes your bones. The kind that makes you walk into something with no backup plan because you know you heard something in your spirit, even if your brain is screaming at you to turn around. But the problem is, most people never get there because they listen to fear's pitch first. Fear is the best manipulator in the world. It doesn't just say you'll fail. It says you failed before, remember. It doesn't just say they'll leave. It says they always leave, don't they? See the pattern? Fear doesn't create new narratives, it just replays the old ones louder. It pulls your past into your present so it can hijack your future. And here's where it gets dangerous. Fear doesn't just talk, you start to build your life around it. You don't take the opportunity. You don't speak up. You don't leave the toxic place. You don't go after the dream. And then you convince yourself that maybe it just wasn't meant to be. But that's not God's voice, that's fear's echo in your mind, dressed in divine language. Faith, on the other hand, is violent. It disrupts, it shatters comfort zones. It makes people uncomfortable, including you. Faith makes you walk through doors you're not qualified for, take chances you can't fully explain, and move like you're already supported when there's nothing under your feet but thin air. And here's the kicker, that's exactly where God works best. In the places where your logic gives up. Psychologically, your brain is always looking for patterns. Familiar equals safe. But faith isn't about what's familiar. It's about what's true. There's a massive difference between comfort and clarity. Fear gives you comfort. Faith gives you clarity. But clarity won't always make you feel safe. It'll make you feel exposed, raw, stretched, like you're risking everything. Because you are. That's why most people never follow it, because fear gives you a plan, but faith demands obedience. Fear shows you all the reasons not to try. Faith shows you the one reason to move and dares you to believe it's enough. But let's be honest, you're scared. You don't want to admit it, but you are. Scared of failing. Scared of looking foolish. Scared of trusting again. Scared of getting your hopes up and watching it all fall apart again. And I get it. I do. Fear is seductive. It promises safety without struggle, but what it delivers is regret without resolution. You think you're being careful, but you're being controlled. You think you're being smart, but you're being small. God gave you power, not paranoia. And every time you choose fear over faith, you hand your power over to something that was never meant to lead you. This is the real war between the voice of fear and the voice of God. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll live into a whole life avoiding risk and calling it wisdom, when really it's just fear wearing a mask. So ask yourself, what am I not doing right now because I'm scared? What promise have I abandoned? What vision have I buried? What call have I silenced? All because fear gave me a more reasonable option. You don't need more logic. You don't need more time. You need courage. Real courage. The kind that stands in front of fear and says, I hear you, but I'm not listening anymore. Because at the end of the day, fear might keep you safe, but only faith will make you free. Most people don't get destroyed by demons, they get destroyed by decisions, emotional ones. Split-second, heat of the moment choices that feel right while everything inside them is screaming. But feelings are loud. And loud things get attention, even when they have no wisdom. Here's what people won't tell you, your emotions will lie to you beautifully. They'll wrap a bad idea in urgency and wrap urgency in justification. I had to say it. I couldn't take it anymore, it just felt right at the time, right? At the time, that's the trap. You built a future off a temporary emotional storm. And now you're wondering why the foundation is cracking. You ever get so hurt that you convince yourself you're thinking clearly? That's the illusion. Pain doesn't make you insightful. It makes you reactive. And most of us, when we're hurt, we don't slow down, we speed up. We think faster, talk faster, move faster. Because stillness would force us to feel everything. And we'd rather run than reflect. So instead of praying, we post. Instead of pausing, we push. And instead of healing, we make something worse and call it closure. You're not closing anything, you're opening wounds that you'll later beg God to heal. Wounds you caused because you let emotion take the wheel and drive like it had a license. You know what's crazy? Deep down you know when something isn't right. You know when you're reacting instead of responding. You know when you're speaking out of fear, not faith. But emotion is addictive. It gives you a rush. You feel powerful when you lash out. You feel in control when you walk away. But later in the silence, when the adrenaline fades, that's when truth shows up. And by then you've already sent the message. You've already burned the bridge. You've already made the decision. That's the cost of emotional leadership. You destroy what logic would have preserved. God speaks in stillness, not noise, not chaos, not panic. If your head is loud, your heart is spinning, and your decisions feel like they're on fire, He's probably not in it. Because when God speaks, He doesn't yell over your pain. He waits. He waits for you to calm down, to step back, to stop bleeding all over the blueprint. But most people don't wait. They move on impulse and then blame the consequences on the devil. The devil didn't do it, you did. You just didn't listen. And let's get psychological for a second. Emotions are data, not directives. They tell you something's happening, but they don't tell you what to do about it. That's your job, but most people treat emotions like commands. I feel angry, so I have to act. I feel afraid, so I have to retreat. That's not maturity, that's emotional slavery. You're letting chemical signals dictate the direction of your entire destiny. There's a reason spiritual maturity always involves discipline. Because when you're disciplined, you can feel the storm and still choose peace. You can feel disrespected and still choose wisdom. You can feel abandoned and still choose purpose. That's real power. Not in how loud you get, but in how silent you can be while everything inside you is screaming for revenge, validation, or escape. But let me guess, you're tired. You're drained. You've been bottling it up for so long that exploding feels like healing. It's not. It's just louder pain. You think you're releasing it. What you're doing is infecting everything around you with something you refuse to process in private. And yes, I know that sounds cold, but some of the deepest wounds you carry didn't come from betrayal or tragedy. They came from moments when you acted without clarity. You didn't wait. You didn't pray. You didn't ask. You just moved. And now you're living in the fallout. This is what God is trying to interrupt. That pattern. That cycle of emotional impulsivity that keeps tricking you into choosing short-term satisfaction over long-term stability. And He's not mad at you for feeling. It's not a sin to feel. But He's asking you not to follow your feelings when they're clearly pulling you away from peace. You want real transformation. Learn to feel everything and follow nothing until God speaks. Because if you don't rule your emotions, they'll ruin everything you were meant to build. You ever wonder how many times God has already shown you? Not told you. Shown you. That job, that relationship, that decision, you saw the red flags. You just colored them white. You edited the warning signs into just a phase. You convinced yourself that dysfunction was just difficulty. You romanticized chaos and then had the audacity to ask God why there's no peace. Let me break it to you gently. He already answered it. The problem is, the answer wasn't what you wanted. So you kept praying, not for clarity, but for a different outcome. You didn't miss the signs. You ignored them. That's the thing about divine warning. It rarely shows up as thunder from the sky. More often it shows up as restlessness, attention. As moments where everything looks okay on the outside, but deep inside your spirit is screaming. That's not anxiety. That's not overthinking, that's discernment. But when you're desperate, discernment sounds like doubt and you silence it. See, humans have a terrifying ability. We can lie to ourselves so convincingly that we believe it's the truth. And once you believe the lie, you'll bend everything else around it to make it feel justified. You'll stay in toxic places and say, God is testing me. No, He already told you to leave. You'll keep chasing that opportunity that drains your soul and call it perseverance. No, it's disobedience dressed as discipline. You know why people ignore red flags? Because deep down they're afraid of the alternative. Afraid to start over. Afraid to be alone. Afraid to walk into the unknown with nothing but trust. So instead of facing fear, they choose familiarity even when that familiarity is killing them. And here's where it gets dark. The longer you ignore the signs, the more numb you get. At first you notice the tension. You feel the disconnect. You hear the quiet voice saying this isn't it. But if you override it long enough, that voice fades. Not because it's gone, but because your comfort drowned it out. God's not silent. You've just turned up the volume on your own will. You don't want truth. You want permission. And when God doesn't give it, you create it. That's how people end up stuck in cycles that look like punishment, but are actually the result of ignored instruction. He told you, through people, through silence, through unease, through repeated patterns, through failed attempts. You just didn't listen. And now you're calling consequences attacks when really they're just the natural outcome of rebellion. Let's talk psychology for a second. Your brain will always choose the path of least resistance. That means even in the face of truth, your mind will rewrite reality to protect your ego. And if your identity is attached to something like a person, a title, a dream, you'll fight to keep it alive, even when it's rotting. Why? Because admitting you were wrong feels more painful than living in the wrong thing. That's how deep pride runs. And pride doesn't just shout, "I'm right." Sometimes pride whispers, "I can fix it." Pride makes you stay longer, work harder, try more even when God's already said no. You're not being loyal. You're being stubborn. And stubbornness will make you miss your miracle trying to repair what was meant to fall apart. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. God's mercy doesn't mean endless chances to ignore Him. Sometimes mercy looks like removal, like disruption, like a door slammed so hard you couldn't reopen it if you tried. Not because He's angry, but because you wouldn't walk away on your own. So He ended it for you, and you call it heartbreak, but really it was rescue. You keep asking for peace, but peace doesn't come through more information. Peace comes through obedience. You don't need another sign. You just need the courage to accept the ones He already gave you. He's not going to say it a 10th time. He's waiting to see if you'll finally trust what He said the first time. So here's the question you have to ask yourself: what am I still holding on to that God already told me to let go of? Because if you keep ignoring the signs, eventually they stop feeling like warnings and start feeling like normal. And that's when you know you've made a mistake so loud even heaven had to go quiet. Don't call it confusion, if it's really just disobedience in disguise. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times have you sabotaged your own progress because deep down you didn't believe you deserved it? People talk about fear of failure all the time, but the real killer, the silent one, is fear of success. Because success comes with responsibility. It comes with exposure. It comes with the terrifying question, what if I actually become everything I said I wanted to be? And some of you aren't ready for that. You say you are, but the moment life starts aligning, you flinch. You start pulling back, missing deadlines, ghosting opportunities, picking fights with people who support you. Not because you're incapable, because you're unfamiliar with being stable. See, when dysfunction is all you've known, peace feels like a trap. When chaos raised you, calm feels like abandonment. When pain built your identity, healing threatens to make you unrecognizable. That's why some of you keep circling the same wilderness even when the door to the promised land is wide open. It's not that you don't see the blessing, it's that your trauma trained you to mistrust it. Let's go deeper. Psychologically, your brain will always default to what's familiar. Not what's right. Not what's healthy. Just what it knows. That means if you grew up surrounded by instability, betrayal, scarcity, then you've wired your mind to expect that. So when something good happens, something peaceful, consistent, trustworthy, your nervous system goes into shock. You start looking for the catch. You assume something's wrong. And if nothing is wrong, you'll create it. This is self-sabotage, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet compromises, subtle doubt. A pattern of undermining your own elevation because somewhere deep inside you've confused suffering with identity.